Hello, good afternoon, folks, and welcome to November's edition of Staff Wellness and Health Booster Sessions. And we are excited to present today's session on addressing and preventing staff burnout and compassion fatigue. My name is Sherry Lissy Sirgerson, and I'm with Shared Health, Mental Health and Addictions, and I will be the moderator for today's session. Your days are full. You feel like you're working more but achieving less. Your energy and mood are low. You feel you can't fully bring yourself to work and don't feel present outside of work. Sound familiar? Providing direct services to folks requires a lot of care and compassion and can sometimes lead to compassion fatigue, which has been termed the cost of caring. Burnout is another concern that is top of mind, especially for those providing health services. In this presentation, we will discuss and define both of these topics and look at how we can use self-compassion as a form of self-care to recognize, mitigate, and combat compassion fatigue and burnout. Our presenter today is Cameron Tyndall, Director of Mental Health and Addictions, Sarah Rial Mental Health and Addictions. So before we get to the presentation, I just wanted to note that we will have a few minutes for questions once Cameron is finished. So if any questions come to mind during the presentation, you can enter them into the questions session. Also, today's session is being recorded and will be made available as a streaming video on demand on Shared Health's mental health resource page. So with that, I will turn it over to Cameron. Welcome, Cameron.
Great, thank you very much. Hello, everybody. Thank you for attending the session today. So we're going to be looking, as mentioned, at addressing and preventing staff burnout and compassion fatigue. And we're also going to look at how self-compassion can be used as a tool to keep you well or to help you bring you back if you're not feeling well in the first place. So before we get started, I just want to start with a land acknowledgement. So I acknowledge that we are gathered on Treaty 1 territory and that Manitoba is located on the treaty territories and ancestral lands of the Anishinaabe, Cree, Dakota, Dene, and Oji-Cree peoples, and the homeland of the Métis Nation. I also acknowledge that northern Manitoba includes lands that were and are the ancestral lands of the Inuit. I approach my work with humility and in hopes of contributing to an agenda of reconciliation. So thank you very much for that. So we're going to be doing a few different things today. We're going to take a look at some of the objectives. So I'm very aware of the time. I'm going to try to balance making sure we get through all the material with making sure that you have enough time for lunch. So bear with me if I am talking too fast or I'm going over things too quickly. Please make sure to throw them in the chat and I can hopefully address them at the end when we have a bit more time. So objective-wise, we're going to look at burnout, what it is, we'll define it, what are some of the warning signs, how it can impact us both personally as well as professionally. We're going to look at strategies to prevent and manage burnout for ourselves and our coworkers. Burnout is a workplace phenomenon, so having a supportive workforce or being able to kind of recognize it in yourself and in others can be very beneficial. Next, we're going to look at and define compassion fatigue and how that contributes to burnout, especially for care providers. Compassion fatigue, unfortunately, is a very, I don't want to say special, but it's a subset of burnout that happens especially for care providers. So we're going to look at why that is and some of the symptoms and define it. And then look at how self-compassion can be used as a tool to help us stay well. So for the next part, before we look at the difficulties of caregiving, there are a lot of positives. We all know it's very fulfilling. It's a way to help people. It's a way to give back. It's very satisfying. And it's a way to practice compassion and empathy. So for people who are care providers and compassion and empathy is just who they are, it's kind of a catch-22 because at the same time, working in a field that requires you to have such a high level of compassion all the time and caring for others, especially when others are maybe experiencing traumatic events, maybe it's medically they're not doing well, maybe it's emotionally they're not doing well. But that's one of the difficulties, kind of the gift and curse of working in the caregiving field, is that constant use of, calling up compassion and empathy to care for people. So in addition to that, as I'm sure you all know, it's very demanding, and it can drain you emotionally, spiritually, physically, and mentally. So it's not just the physical aspect of doing the job. Like I said, the constant calling up of compassion and empathy can be very emotionally, spiritually, and mentally draining, especially if you don't have tools or opportunities or time to be able to kind of refill your cup, to be able to bring yourself back to the job. This presentation was adapted for one that I had done previously for long-term care workers during COVID, but I think some of these are still relevant and still resonate with people, in that you may be dealing with people who are isolated, maybe don't have supports, or who are experiencing medical issues, or maybe are at the end of life, and having to witness and be compassionate and empathic to those people and see them not have the support systems can be very, very difficult to manage. I don't know about the changing protocols, I'm not going to lie on that part, but the fear for family and residents also goes with the compassion and empathy, and being drained by this, again, seeing people isolated, seeing people not, not being supported, or just fear for their family and residents of, like I said, if somebody's near end of life or is in a medical emergency and not knowing the outcome. That can be a very, very difficult thing to comprehend and to manage internally. So moving from the difficulties, this is what compassion fatigue and burnout can look like. So if you've heard people say this, at work, or maybe you've been saying this internally, it might be time to check in with either a coworker or maybe your supervisor, because this is what we call dissonance. You're in a, and that just means that your thoughts don't match your actions, and your actions don't match your thoughts about a certain thing. So in a profession that requires you to have such high empathy and compassion, if you're saying things like, oh, I can't help this one, will this day ever end? Life is so screwed up. Where do I begin with this? They don't cover this in school. That can be really difficult to manage, because again, having to be compassionate and empathic in order to deliver quality services, if this is your sentiment or this is what your feelings are, you could be in the beginning stages or getting into a period of compassion fatigue and burnout. So there's many components, and we'll define compassion fatigue a little bit more down the line, but there's emotional component, there's a cognitive component, there's a psychological component, and all areas of your life can be impacted when you're experiencing compassion fatigue or going through a period of burnout. So again, the cost of caring. And burnout, again, I'm aware of the time, so has three major components. So these three things usually work in unison. You may be experiencing them all at once, or it might happen over a period of time. So when we talk about exhaustion, we're talking about emotional exhaustion, feeling emotionally drained and fatigued, but this is exhaustion all encompassing. You're physically tired, you're mentally tired, you're spiritually tired, you're emotionally tired. And it's not the tiredness where, oh, I've had a long shift or I've had a long day, and you get a good rested and you're rejuvenated. This is a chronic and persistent and prevalent thing that goes on for a very long period of time, where you just feel you can't get back to feeling well. And when you're exhausted, that can lead to a whole host of mental health and as well as physical issues. And it also leads into the next part of the puzzle here of cynicism. So you're feeling exhausted. Now you're becoming cynical, where you have a negative outlook towards work, you have a negative outlook towards life. Like the past slide we just looked at, oh, I can't help this person, this is their fault, they deserve this. I can't do this anymore. So that's usually a sign when, especially if you've been someone who's been compassionate and empathic leading up to that point, when you start feeling or placing blame on participants, and going against kind of your value system here, when you're required to be compassionate and empathic, that can be one of the biggest indicators in my experience that you're starting to experience burnout. Because like I said, it goes against your values, or kind of the whole reason you're doing this is to provide care and support and be compassionate and empathic. So when you're not feeling that and you're feeling like things will never get better, you know, work is terrible, I can't help anybody, some of these people deserve it, I can't help this one, that's when you really need to check in with yourself as well as with a coworker or a supervisor. And of course, when you're feeling exhausted, you're feeling cynical, you're going to have a reduction in your professional efficiency. So this, I will mention, can be real or perceived. Lots of times when people are going through a period of burnout or exhaustion, um, they may be doing the work and doing it well, but it just feels so much more tasking. So you might be getting the job done, but you might perceive that you're not, or that you're just going through the motions. Or, you know, you could realistically be having a reduction in your accuracy. You might be forgetting things. You might be doing things slower. You might be blanking out on things that you regularly would just do kind of, you know, secondhand. So if you're noticing any of these three things or all three of these things, again, you might want to be looking at getting some help for burnout or compassion fatigue. So looking at some of the risk factors for burnout, and I don't think there'll be any surprises here, but uncertainties. You know, if you don't have job stability, if you're wondering if your coworkers are going to show up, are you wondering, you know, if your boss or your coworkers are unpredictable, any type of uncertainty is kind of a fuel for anxiety. And if that anxiety goes long enough, it can just parlay itself into more and bigger and larger issues. Work overload, you know, feeling like you have more work than you have time for, feeling like you have to do more with less resources, the social conflict. So this could be, especially in the care fields, maybe unpleasant interactions with supervisors, unpleasant interactions with coworkers, unpleasant interactions with families or with the patients themselves. So all of that can, you know, make you feel like you're not doing your job well, especially if you're already feeling overwhelmed or you're feeling exhausted. It can just, you know, give you more anxiety around things. And again, the longer that anxiety goes, the less confident and competent you're going to feel, and it becomes much harder to manage yourself in the workplace. Role ambiguity. So am I doing this right? Do I know what the expectations are of me? Are their expectations reasonable? Do I feel like I'm going outside of my scope and skill set? So all of that can go together to, again, increase that anxiety and put you at a risk factor for burnout the longer it goes. Lack of control and autonomy. Do I know where my decision-making powers lie? Do I know what I can be in control of? Do I know where things are? Do I have the resources to do my job? And then lastly, being undermined, undervalued, or underappreciated. That can really be a real punch to the mental health and the emotional well-being of people if they constantly and chronically are feeling undermined, or that their work isn't valuable, or that people aren't appreciating what they're doing. So these are all risk factors. This is not an exhaustive list. There can be other related things, but these are some of the main ones that can really contribute to either pushing you further into burnout or bringing you into it. So what is the impact of burnout? Some of these I've already mentioned. So physical and mental health issues, personal conflict, not only in the workplace, but at home as well, or in your personal life. When you're feeling exhausted and you're having conflict in the workplace, or you're burnt out, you're feeling irritable, going home, having to manage all of life stressors on top of that. So you have the internal pressure, the external pressures. It can just lead to more conflict both in and outside of the workforce. Substance use is something that's very common. To deal with things, I'm just going to self-medicate. At least that way I can sleep, or I can kind of put it out of my mind for a while. Reduce motivation, reduce productivity, like we just talked about with the reduced professionalism. Absenteeism, presenteeism. So these are two, either not being at work or being at work and not being present. And these are both equally as impactful in the workplace. Presenteeism, especially in a caregiver role or working in a hospital or anything, when you're there, you need to be on, right? And presenteeism is when people are showing up and they're not present. They're not ready to work. They're maybe off, worried about other things, or they're just showing up because they feel they have to. And that can be dangerous in regards to if you're administering medications, or if you have responsibilities where you really need to be in tune and on, that could be really dangerous. So tiredness, low energy, increase of or no appetite, lack of sleep. Usually 3 areas you can tell when something's going wrong is diet, sleep, and exercise. Either excessive or pulling back on any of those areas usually is a cause for concern if it's not a plan. And then feels like you have nothing more to give. And, it leaves people feeling increasingly helpless, hopeless, and resentful. And when you get far into the stages of burnout, that resentfulness starts to come in. You start resenting your coworkers, you resent yourself, you resent the participants or your clients or your patients, because you feel helpless and hopeless. And it's a horrible thing. And if you are feeling these, I know I keep repeating this, but self-care and making sure you have an outlet, whether it's an EAP or another coworker or something, is extremely, extremely important. So we're getting close to the end here. So compassion fatigue and burnout. So compassion fatigue, like I said, is a special subset of burnout that happens, and it's usually a few different things. It can be vicarious trauma, traumatic stress response, but you can't have compassion fatigue without burnout, but you can have burnout without compassion fatigue. So the little bit of difference there is burnout might cause you to not be able to do the duties of your job, where compassion fatigue is more specific in the relational aspect to your patients, or that emotional and empathy and compassion dynamic. So feelings of helplessness and powerlessness in the face of patient suffering. So maybe you become unreactive or overly reactive to participant or client issues, right? Things that you used to be able to emotionally manage before, you just can't do it anymore. Reduced feelings of empathy and sensitivity. Sometimes you shut down. And that can be assigned to, like I said, when you are regularly compassionate and empathic and being able to help people, and then all of a sudden you just don't feel anything, you need to check in. And then feeling overwhelmed and exhausted by work demands. So that's where the burnout and compassion fatigue are similar, but the 2 big ones are the inability to call up that compassion and relate and have that emotional connection with your participants, your clients or patients. And then also feeling overly either triggered or under triggered when you see someone in pain. So how can self-compassion help? So self-compassion has 3 distinct parts. Common humanity, every human being has his struggle or has their struggles. Mindfulness, I'm having a really hard time right now. And self-kindness, how can I comfort and care for myself in this moment? So I'll quickly define all 3 of them. So the common humanity piece is really important, and it's not to diminish what you're going through. It's more to relate this idea that to be human is to suffer. So not that it diminishes what you're going through, but take solace in the fact that everybody's going through it. Everybody's got problems, and it's to feel that you're not alone in this. So you don't start thinking, oh, this is just me. This is my character. I'm weak. That's not what this is saying. This is saying that, this is to put it in a human context that everybody goes through something. So it's okay to feel this way, and you should feel this way, and it's good to process it and get it out. Mindfulness is the idea, I'm sure many people have heard of mindfulness before, but bringing yourself back into the present so that your emotions and your thoughts don't run away with things and start making assumptions or really escalate you into, an emotional, put you into crisis or anything like that. So being able to ground yourself, whether it's breathing exercises, some people like more tactile things, you can do, use your senses, a cold splash of water, but anything to just, before your brain starts escalating and running away with things, to say, okay, I need to pull this back in. And then the self-kindness piece is treating yourself like you would treat a friend. We are we criticize ourselves a lot, especially self-criticism. That's kind of everybody's go-to. And then when you treat somebody or help somebody like a friend or something like that, you have a completely different approach to it. So this is that idea that treat yourself the same way you would treat a friend who is struggling. So things that self-compassion are not, and this is usually where people struggle, is because they feel like, oh, I'm giving myself self-pity, or I'm weak, or I'm this kind of, it's not that at all. It's not self-pity, it's not self-indulgent. This is something that you need to do to be able to keep yourself well. You need to be able to give yourself a break sometimes and acknowledge that you're going through a tough time. to be able to take a breath and just be like, I am struggling right now, and that's okay because I'm a human being and I need to take care of myself. The self-esteem piece is more related to the mindfulness piece of that. Self-esteem is an external validation from other factors. Oh, you're great. It's people telling you that. Self-compassion is not self-esteem because self-compassion is internal validation. So it's not about building your self-esteem and needing other people to build you up. That does help. But this is a way of looking internally and being like, if I can self-validate and I can learn to love myself and give myself a break, that's where self-compassion can help you deal with things in a more constructive way. So looking at some ways to, if you're, maybe you're in the, in the workplace and you're really struggling with something, or something's got you triggered, or work's coming to home, or home's coming to work. This is just a brief thing that you can do to kind of get yourself grounded and walk yourself through it. So here we're looking, you don't have to do this right now, especially if you're at work. I don't want to have anybody triggered or escalating or anything like that. But the next time you're really going through it and you're struggling with something, acknowledge it. So this is a moment of suffering. Suffering is a part of life. May I be kind to myself? And that's a way to just kind of get yourself in the mindset and the process of going through and being like, it's okay to acknowledge my struggle, but it's also just as important to make sure I acknowledge my own self-worth, and that I can give myself a break and I can deal with it either right now, or at least now that I've acknowledged it, I can deal with it at a later time. So how can we practice self-compassion? Here's a few tips for you. So start small. Start with being mindful, really paying attention to how you're feeling physically, emotionally, mentally. Compassionate journaling, writing things out, things that you're thankful for. Also, gratitude journaling is something that's very common, or just journaling in general, just getting your feelings out there. But things that you're compassionate about, and especially compassionate for yourself. So think about how you would respond to someone who you care about. Like I had mentioned, that's a really, really good one. When you catch yourself beating yourself up, say like, would I say this to a friend? Would I give them this advice? So there again, challenging and understanding the self-criticism. So if you are self-criticizing, take a step back and be like, is this real? Am I just beating myself up to this level because it's my own internal dialogue? So make sure you challenge yourself, because sometimes your brain can lie to you when you're in the throes of a crisis or feeling overwhelmed. Ask yourself what you need right now or what will prevent suffering later. Plan compassionate phrases. I've heard this done before where people will just keep them in their pocket at work. When you're not feeling well and you're feeling like you're getting overwhelmed, read something. Read a quote, something that makes you happy, something that reminds you to get back to you and give yourself a break can be very, very helpful. And then breath work. So take a moment to breathe deeply, tune into how you're feeling, purposely calm yourself down little bits at a time, but just make sure that you're giving yourself the space and grace to be able to deal with it, the same way you would with somebody else that you were trying to help. And lastly, just remember that you have the right to take care of yourself, to seek help from others, and most of all, to be human. So next time, hopefully, that you're feeling overwhelmed, or you feel like you're burning out, or you're feeling like you got nothing to give, remind yourself of these things, because it's important. You got to take care of yourself. You need to reach out when you need help, and that you're a human being. So to do the work that you do and not be impacted or overwhelmed at some point is the equivalent of trying to walk through water and not get wet. So it's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when. So the more you can practice this and get into that mindset, the better off you're going to be. And then you also have the right to receive consideration, affection, forgiveness, and acceptance. So be gracious, obviously, but accept those compliments. When somebody says, hey, you're doing a good job, or the forgiveness can be just for yourself, or just be accepting of others. Yeah, and then applaud yourself for the courage it takes to do your job. Your jobs are incredibly difficult, and you deal with things on a daily basis that not many people will in their lives. So make sure that you applaud yourself for the great work that you do and that you continue to do. And make sure to take the bouquets that people give you, and when they say thank you, really internalize that and help you to be self-compassionate and really be accepting of yourself. So I believe there were some documents that were provided or will be provided, but there's an after work checkout as well as a self-care kind of management plan that you can take a look at. So I know I went over a little bit, but yeah, there we go.
That's totally fine, Cameron. I almost feel like you were doing your presentation, and I'm sitting here nodding and agreeing and wishing that we could start every day with some compassion and with some of those tenets that you shared. So we have time for questions. So I'll just let folks kind of take a moment to sit in everything that you shared. There was quite a bit of great information there. So Cameron, when you're talking about giving yourself compassion, what are some practices that you do for yourself when you're in a spot where you may not be feeling your best?
I like mindfulness. Mindfulness to me is one of the handiest things for me. So I use grounding techniques. Breathing is a big one for me. There's a thing called square breathing. So that's a way that you can control your breath. You breathe in for 4 seconds, you hold it for 4 seconds, you breathe out for 4 seconds, and then you hold that out breath for 4 seconds. And it just is a reset to kind of get you back in the zone and get you back to where you need to do. And then the mindfulness of not pushing my emotions to the side, but mindfulness is kind of looking at emotions like a river, or that they're just floating out there, and it's not attaching any meaning to them per se. It's not dismissing them, but it's not letting them run away. So for me, it's very helpful to just be like, okay, I am stressed right now. This is why I'm stressed. It's okay that I'm stressed. It's okay that I'm feeling overwhelmed. It just prevents me from getting into that anxiety type of thing where it's just like, oh, I'm a terrible person and I don't, I'll never be smart again and I'm going to lose my job.
Yeah, and then we circle the drain a little bit there too, right? Yeah, that's great.
Exactly.
So there is a question here too. I just wanted to get to that as well. So how do you support a coworker who may be experiencing burnout or compassion fatigue? A really good question. So maybe it's not you, but you're noticing some of this in people that you work with.
Yep. I think first and foremost, you got to know what the relationship is, right? So if you have a really good relationship with this person and you can be direct with them and just be like, hey, like I feel and I'm noticing, and I mean, always have a reason for it where you're just not saying it out of nowhere, but just say, hey, like I feel like I've noticed a difference in you, either with your behavior or just how you're bringing yourself to work, or maybe you're seeing some of that cynicism or the reduction in stuff. But I think just being genuine, just be honest, and always go at it with compassion, to just be, to say, hey, I'm concerned for you. And even if you don't want to talk to me about it, can I help you find some resources, or is there anything that you would want to talk to me about? And I mean, maybe just even, like I said, if there's an EAP program, just providing them resources. But I always think having that kind of compassionate curiosity to just go at it from that angle of, hey, I've noticed this and I don't want to intrude and I respect your autonomy, but I've noticed X, Y, and Z and I'd like to help if you'd be willing to. And I think that kind of starts the conversation.
Right. I love that. That's great. I'll just wait a second to see. Oh, and you got a kudos for that. So your flowers. I thank you for that. Wonderful. Okay, so this presentation has been recorded, and so it will be available for folks. So I'll just read our little outro here. So thank you again to everyone for joining us today, and to Cameron for his terrific presentation. Our next edition of the Booster Series is December 5th, when the topic will be equity, diversity, and inclusion. And our presenter for that session is Allison Weens. Information on how to register for the session has been shared through our usual channels and is also available on our page for the Shared Health website. So again, thank you to Cameron for your presentation and for everyone who has attended. So I hope folks have a really great day and take a moment for themselves.
Awesome. Great. Thank you. Take care, everybody.
Thanks, Cameron. Yeah, nice to meet you. Take good care.
Bye.
Okay, bye, folks.